So we are starting a new topic today, and it's all about CSS. I have a little presentation for you guys as usual, and the presentation is supposed to walk you guys through CSS. As usual, we have our little presentation that I've cooked up so that we can use it to understand what CSS is all about. CSS is cascading style sheet, and the purpose of CSS is to make it easy for you to style your website. When HTML was created, so this is like a backstory. When HTML was created, it was not meant to be designed in a style in the format that it is now, the dynamism that we have in HTML. It was not meant to look like that. It was just meant to present fonts and text and what have you. So over time they start bringing in complexity into the design, and it was discovered that CSS needs to be created. We need to create a different language to actually style this language that we've created. So HTML was created to present information, the document for the web. So over time, design start coming up, complexity start becoming part of HTML, and the people that design it now thought to themselves that, oh, it would be nice if we have something separate that is used to design these documents, and hence CSS was born. So CSS primary aim is to make your website fancy, to make it look better. So we have 4 points here. Say CSS stands for cascading style sheet, so that's a given. So you need to know the meaning. So another thing again that CSS does is that it describes it describes how HTML elements are to be displayed on the screen, paper, or on other medias, because the HTML does not only display on your web, it displays on your phone, it displays on the printer or your print medium. So what CSS allows you to do is to decide or tell the print medium or the media that are looking at it from how they should show. So CSS is actually as powerful as that. It also saves you a lot of work. If you guys notice, when we were doing HTML, you notice we do a lot of coding. So CSS allows you to do little coding, and you're going to see that in action by the time we start using CSS. So CSS can also be stored as an external file. So all this design that you might have done, you can also reuse it. So it can be saved in a place whereby you can also reuse it. So that's what it means by it being saved in another file. Then how do you then add this wonderful CSS to your page? Because the idea is you already design your page, we know how to design it in a page. How do you then bring CSS into the mix of all these things and then make the whole thing exciting? The first method is inline by inline method, and the inline method is what we have been using ever since. We've been using that constantly, we've never derailed from it, and you will notice that the inline method uses the style attributes. You only use the style attributes to initiate the inline method. That is what we've been using for over the past months that we've been doing HTML. And from this lesson, we are going to change from using the style attributes to use what? To use the second method, which is internal CSS. What internal CSS does is that you are supposed to put all your style in a separate block of code, meaning it does not mix with your HTML. I'll take that again. The first inline style that we've been using ever since always mix with our HTML. So the method we will not be going on with now is the second method, which is inline. Allow you to style your code separately from your HTML code technically. So you have a style attribute, or rather a style tag, that you place in between your head section, and within that section, that's where you write all the CSS you will ever need. Don't worry, as usual, we'll get to coding and then you get to see the exciting thing. The final method in which you can bring in your CSS into your program is through what? External means. What that means is that you would have cooked up your CSS somewhere, you designed it, and you want to bring it in. You can just link to it, and it's visible. It's something that you can then see, and you can see the sample code right there. We actually provided the sample code to all these methods. The inline, you can see directly, it uses the style attribute. The internal uses the style tag or the style element to actually bring in your design, your styling in. The external one references another document that you've already designed and kept somewhere, and then you use it. So let's take one more slide before we get to the code. One more slide, then we get to the interesting part. The last slide is talking about how do you then say, oh, this is what I want to style. You guys have seen HTML, and then you know how tags are flying everywhere. How do you then say, oh, this is the particular thing I want to style? How do you do that? You have something called CSS Selector. The purpose of CSS Selector is for you to select the element in which you want to style. You guys note that everything on HTML is elements. They are element based. So how do you now specify that this is the particular thing you want to style? You use the selector to choose or to determine what you need to style. So what that means is that you need to know how to find an element using a selector. For the purpose of this today's class, we'll be finding elements by name, by ID, and class. You guys should not worry. We'll put all those things in coding and you're going to see it. So this is an example, and we have a selector, how a selector looks like. I'm not going to explain this right now. Let's get into the coding, and then you're going to have much robust explanation there. This is just to have a proper documentation, and we're going to provide this in the Telegram group. So if you guys have not joined the Telegram group, the link is on our bio. Go to Telegram, search for Process Guide Community, and you can join. It's free to join. Let's see what we have in our coding environment. Let's open the coding side and start everything we've talked about now. So let's do a recap. So these are our templates already. We have CSS 101, that's the course or the title of today's topic. I'm gonna have our title page there, even though we're not using it, but let me just have a title page just for it to balance, and then I'll put a CSS 101. Remember, the way you add style is inline. That's the one we've been doing all this while, and we're changing that from today. So you are not allowed to use inline styling from today again. So the purpose of all this one I was doing is just to teach you guys. From today, no inline styling again. So I'm canceling the inline styling, and I'm going to demonstrate to you what CSS is all about and the power of CSS. The method we're going to be using is going to be using style elements. That's the method we're going to be using. So if you look at the slide that we have, so you notice that we're using internal CSS, and that is added underwear inside the head element. So that's what we're going to add it. So here where you have your head in the head section, you're going to have another tag which is new now, and that tag is called style. And mind you, the purpose of this tag is such that you can style your entire page. That's the purpose of what we want to do. We want to style the entire page. So right now we need to create a document for us to style. So I need to create a random HTML page so that we can style it, and then you see what is going on. So I'm going to put something here. I'm going to put welcome. So in this section, I'm just going to put a paragraph that talks about what this class is going to be saying. And I can say CSS Selectors. Okay, I think we should be good with this. I will be able to demonstrate what I want to demonstrate with the few things I have here. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is we have three types of selectors that I want to mention. But by the way, now you've seen that we want to add our CSS, and you've seen where you need to add your CSS declaration inside the head section or the said head element. And you can see it's between line 6 and line 8 in my own coding environment. In your own coding environment, it can be a different line, but all your style will go in here. And I'm going to make it big so that you can understand what I'm about to draft out now. There's what we call syntax. I've explained syntax to you guys before, and I'm going to do that explanation again. A syntax is the acceptable way you can write your code, in which you should write your code that the browser will accept it. So I want to write the syntax for specifying a rule on CSS or declaring a CSS rule. So let's say we want to make this h1, we want to make it red. I want to do something simple. By now, you know how to do it using the style attribute. If you want to use the style attribute to do it, you will just say color red. So you do color red. This is what you guys are used to. And the purpose of this is to explain that you could use style attribute to do it. Now, if you want to do this in the head section, it's a little bit different. Number one, rule one, to how do you implement it? You have to use a selector to target the h1. How do you get this h1? How do you tell this style that you are looking for h1? Is by getting the h1 by the name of the element. The name of this element is called h1. The name of this element, which is body, is called body. The name of this element, which is p, is called p. So it's very easy to know. So if let me write another element now, and let's say we have a, we already know anchor tag, and I just say click here. The name of this element anchor is what? Is a. So the name of this element h1 is what? h1. So h1 will sit right here. Because h1 is what I want to style, I'll put h1 here. And I was talking about the syntax. So let me write the syntax out before I write the code to style it to red. The syntax for writing a CSS rule is you write the selector. You have to write the selector, followed by this bracket sign. The selector name, and say selector name, right? And then followed by this bracket. Then inside the bracket, you put your CSS property, CSS property, column, then CSS value. That is it. And then you terminate it with semicolon. This is the rule that you must follow in writing any CSS rule. If you want to style anything, this is how you will do it. So let's use this rule now to change h1 to red. That's what we want to do. So now h1, by declaring it, by specifying we want to target h1. How do you target h1? By just writing h1. That's just it, because we are using targeted by name of the element. That's the method we are using. So you just specify h1, which is the selector name. h1 is the selector name. That's fine. The next thing you need to do is to open this parenthesis here. Then followed by what? Your declaration. What CSS property can change this one to color red is called the color property. So you write your color, and what then is the value that you want to specify. Then you say red, and that is it. So let me delete this so that you can have a clearer view of what I just did. I think everything got deleted. So I think it looks clearer now. You want to style h1, you write h1 here, and then you open parentheses, you start putting the rules here. So this is called a declaration. It's called a declaration. So you just made a declaration. Now this is like a property declaration. You say you set color to the red. You can go ahead and write more declarations, meaning you can have more style applied to a particular element. So let's say you want to make it italics, or you want to make it, let's increase the font, or let's even change the font, let's change the font size. And because we are using Visual Studio Code, you can see that it helps to show you other properties that you can make use of. So let's use 30px, or let's use something very big so it will be obvious. Let's do 50. So you can see how you can change that. As I've said, you can add as many rules as you want. And note what this is doing. You are targeting a particular element, which is H1. And this is selector method 1, which is selecting by name, the name of the element. That's what we just did now. So I'm going to give this a styling so that you will know what this is all about before we move on to the next thing. So selector by name, meaning this method is how to select by name. Let's go ahead and do some other things. Let's say you want to style the P, the paragraph there. You want to increase the font because this looks also small. How do you do that? The same method we did to style our H1, you will use that to style your P. It's just to say P. That's the selector name. And you come here, you open parentheses, you break and start writing your declaration inside. You start with the CSS, property. What's responsible for changing the font size is called font-size. And the value you want to use, let's use 20 px. You can then see the change will just appear there. So that is how to style. Now notice something very profound. Do you notice how clean this is? Do you see how clean this is? No code, nothing is, no CSS is here to alter the view of what is happening. And that's the intention of what CSS is supposed to do. It's supposed to decluster your HTML in such a way that you can separate the styling from the tag, and that way you can always specify different tags to what your different styling to the same page, and you can always have a page to not look as if you've upgraded the site just by changing the style alone. Okay, let's move on to the next thing that we have here. And the next thing is, how do you style by other methods? Because this is styling by name alone. Let's see what we have next in our slide that we promised to do today. So we have styling by name. That's what we just did now. We have another thing called styling by ID and styling by class. And because I want you to see quite a lot of stuff, I'm going to bring up our previous things that we've done so that you're going to see the styling come to life. So let's bring up what we've done before so that we're going to see the styling come to life. I'm going to use the form we designed last. There's this form we designed, and I'm going to clear all the styling and use the styling to teach you all these other things I want to show you guys. So this is what I want to do. I want to delete all the styling we have here. So this serves as a very good example. I'm going to remove all the styling that we have here. All the styling that we have here. I said, as from today, you are not supposed to be using style attributes. So all your style is supposed to be in the CSS and it's supposed to make it look clean. So you have, an innocent looking template which doesn't have any style. And the idea is that we want to start styling it, and I want to use this to teach you all the requirements of everything you need to know about the simple selector, because that's what we're going for today. Simple selector. I've shown you how to select by name. We want to repeat it again now. We want to select by name so that we can have this guy styled. You can see how plain this is. So we want to have it styled. I'm interested in the text box because you can see it's very close together. So I want to space it out in such a way that it can give space to the top and to the bottom. So there are still some things we're going to explain, but today is just for how to target what you want to style. Remember, we want to target how to target what you want to style. That's the purpose of today. How do you target what you want to style? So we're targeting inputs. So this is an input element now. We want to style this. And I've told you guys that our styling is supposed to be inside our style element. So what's the tag that controls this? What's responsible for this? You can go and look at the code and you see that it's input. Is it here? Is input. So you can say, okay, Let me style input so that everything input will have a specific look. So how do you do it? You put your input name, that's the name of the tag, followed by parentheses like this, open bracket, and you start writing your code. What I want to do is I want to make the width 100%. I want to make the width 100%. Maybe it's too much. Let's just do 90%. Then I notice that it's too thin. As I mentioned, I want to increase the padding. I will explain what this padding does in our next video, and that so that I'm going to explain other things to you guys. But what we are doing today is simple selector, so I don't want to mix the classes together. So I'm working on simple selector. So I've just done that. Another thing I want to do is you will notice the font. The font is not looking cool. So I want to change the font of everything what we have here. And how do you then change the font of everything on the site? That's a little bit tricky. You can't be identifying individual tags. Say, okay, for H1 I want to change for H1. I want to change for table separately. I want to change for label separately. You could target a root element, which is the body, and style everything in the body, and it will take effect. So how do you style everything in the body? You target it by the name. Simple, just the same way you target the input element. You could just target the body, and anything that you declare in the body is what will happen to the content of the page. So let's go ahead and try that. So you do font family. Font family allows you to bring in fonts. So again, we'll get to a point whereby you will know all these properties. There's a directory where you're going to see all the properties available. So it allows you to know what is doable, and what is not doable. So when you learn all those things, it will let you know what can be done and what what can be done. Okay, let's just pick this. Okay, I'm going with that. That's the font I'm using. So the next thing I want to do is so we've been able to sensibly explain how you can select each of these inputs, each of these by name. So we've been able to do by name. The next thing we want to do is by ID. Let me explain what ID means. An ID is an attribute that is added to an element to make the element unique across the page. So the purpose of an ID is to uniquely identify that element. Okay, just look at this page as it is now. You have form, you have div, you have h1, you have small, you have all these tags. How do you identify this particular tag alone in such a way that it's unique? Whatever name you give it, it doesn't conflict. What allows you to do that is by specifying the ID attribute. Once you specify that ID attribute, it's gone, it's unique. You can't have multiple IDs that have the same name. It has to be unique to that particular element. And good for us, we made use of it in line 43. You saw that we use ID in text area, and the reason why we even use this ID is such that when you click on the details, it will get focus on it. So if you missed our last video, you can check it out on YouTube. We talked about forms and creation of forms. How do you then target this particular, you could target this text area by just doing text area. Yeah, we know that. So how do you then target by ID? That's the example we want to do. To target by ID, you write the ID name. Remember, we're targeting by ID. You write the ID name here, and you do open bracket. But you need to specify that is an ID, and you use this sign to specify that you're doing ID. So notice what I just did there. After I put the name, then I put the pound sign before the name. This denotes ID. So you can even see what the editor is telling us. It's saying the element ID. It's telling us that this is an ID that we've just selected. So we can see what do we want to let this how do we want to style this detail. We can say, okay, let it be full width, like 90%, just the way we did 90% for our text area, and let it that it's not too close closely typed here, there should be a spacing, just like there was a spacing here. So notice the space between the orange border and the text. We want to maintain that same effect here. So how do you do that? You can repeat the same code in there. We do our padding. I think we use 9 or so, 8, and maintain that. And the next thing we want to do is to have our width 90%, and you see your result. You can see that our form is taking shape and it's making sense. It's now being consistent with, it's not looking like something that is serious. So the next thing we want to do is, and that's how to select by ID. You use the hash sign, you put the name of the ID, and you continue with the rest of the row. Create the rest of the row, and you are done with that. Let's look at the next thing we need to do. The next thing is, how do you select an element by class name? Let's go and see what class name is all about, what class is all about. We've explained the name, that's the element name, which is the name of the tag. We've explained the ID, what the ID means. The class is specifically used by CSS. That is one of the attributes that CSS enforce on all elements. So what that means is that if you want to style anything, it's advisable to use class to style it. So let me give you a scenario. Let's say I want to style this body just the way I've styled it here, which is fine. Or let me use another scenario and I want to use another scenario to explain this. Yes, let me use the label. Very good. Look at this label. Notice that we use the label a lot in the system. The label is what was responsible for all the label on the left hand side here, and also we use it internally when we're specifying the edge, the chrome, and all this one here. We use the label. Let's assume we want to start the label in a particular format, in a way that, let's just start the label styling sake, and let's give it a very gray color. Styling by name will look like this, and then you go with this, then you specify the color to be gray. That's the extension of what we want to do. Notice that the ones that was not styled, or that didn't have the label, like for example this one didn't have the label, so it didn't have the gray, which is fine. That's not what we want to achieve. What we want to achieve right now is that we don't want this part to be gray as well. We don't want this other part, which are our radio boxes label, to be, we don't want them to be gray. We just want them to be something else. The problem with this is because you specify label. So irrespective of which label you are talking to, it doesn't care. It just goes ahead to specify everything. That's the, I won't say danger, that's the heads up you have to note when you are making any, calling any rule or any selector by name. You have to be careful. When you are calling selector by name, it doesn't look, it just goes and look for all labels and change it to whatever you've done. In this case, you can see the difference. So let's now see how can we now specify and say, oh, this is the label we are looking for, we actually care about. We actually care about the label that is on the left hand side. And how do you do that? By specifying a class attribute and giving it a name to your choice, a name of your choice that you think you will be able to understand what it is. And then you can use that in your coding. So let's start with bulk title. If I go with bulk title here, I can come here and say, oh, this bulk title is appearing on the left hand side and I don't want it to be gray. You can just come here and say the class that you should use for it should be, let's say, special label. So what you've just done here is that you've created a class that you can style separately from the rest of what you have here. So let's go ahead and style this special label. Let's style it. What we are trying to do is that we are trying to not style all labels, but we are trying to style only special label. So once you do special label like this, because this is a way to denote a tag, you won't use this one. Because we are specifying a class, you put a dot before it. Once you put a dot before it, it now knows that you are specifying a class. When you use an hash, it means that you are denoting what? An ID. So those are the two differences. And the reason why you will do this is because you don't want the style to apply to a general rule. You just want it to be for a specific group of elements. In this case, you want it to be all the elements on the left hand side. So what that means is that for everything on the left hand side, I'm going to give this class to them and call it special label. So let's look for detail and give it special label class. I'm just going to copy this guy and go to where I have my detail and I put it there. And you see immediately that rule, that style gets applied to it. I'm going to copy the same thing to operating system here over here, and the same thing will apply to it. And now, even though this browser is not, the browser is what? The browser is not a label. I can still style the TD part of it. Remember, the class attribute is applicable to all elements. So I could just do this. I could just add the class and immediately, it operates, it cooperates, and it's looking as if, it's labeled. I'll go ahead and move on to our screenshot. I do the same thing and we are good to go. So that way I've been able to cover the three major or the three simple form of selector. This is the simplest one, and I just want us to use this one to go and practice. So let me take that again. We did by name. So let me take the notes on it so you will know what it is that you're working on here. So I have by name, that's selector by name. This one is also by name, and you will know because this is the name of a tag. This is also a name of a tag. And this is by what? By class. And you will know that because of the dot notation here is by class. And this one here is by ID. You will know that because of the pound sign here. And notice how I've been able to have comments. This is how you write comments in CSS. This is how you write comments in CSS. Looking at this, I think it's now safe for me to show you the CSS rule, how the CSS rule is written. Pretty simple. You have your selector coming first. So who can tell me this selector now is by what? This selector is selector by name, because div is a tag. So this is selector by name. The selector comes first. You come with your open block of declaration, block of code. You can start and end it. Within your block of code, you have declaration. In this case, you have two declarations. And notice how it terminates. It terminates by a semicolon. All declaration terminates by semicolon. The first declaration has a property and has a value. The second declaration has a property and has a value. All these property, you will learn them differently over time, and you should know what each property do. It's like you are trying to color something. You need to know the name of what you need to call and then the value. Yeah, so we'll get to talk about the properties later, but this is what they call a syntax. This is how it has to be written, and all the styling you will be doing will all follow this format. It's quite simple. It will all follow this format, the format of property value, the selector, and you have complex selector, by the way, but this is the most simplest selector that you have out there. Thank you for staying to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on bell notification in order to be notified when we release new videos. See you in the next one.